let's get into today's session. And we're talking today internal comms around internal engagement using the Yammer platform and what that means to Viva Engage. Here with that, over the last few years, we've done an amazing job across policing in adopting a hybrid world. We've become really familiar with using Teams and 365, and it's clearly transformed the way we work, and we can now see us working in a hybrid way. But some colleagues are finding that they're members of dozens of different teams or channels within Teams, and it can be a little bit overwhelming or difficult to navigate to what to be discussed where. You can have as many teams as you need, really, but it still needs to be able to engage with colleagues. And is there a difference between a team and a community? And that's what we'll explore first of all today. There are lots more tools than Teams in the 365 stack, and all of them are included in the licensing and the MOU that we've got. So let's get into describing perhaps how you'd split the difference between a team and potentially a community. And what's the difference between Yammer and 365 Teams? So firstly, let's think in a police context. A team are the colleagues in our unit or business area you work most closely with. They tend to have similar roles and are managed together by a line manager or within a department. So let's think about examples in a force. You've got the finance team in perhaps the DCC's directorate, a neighbourhood policing team, which would include PCs, sergeants, staff, or members of staff in the inspector. Then you'll have response teams, and sometimes they're mixed as well, but they've got different responsibilities. Or a local CID department are often a team, but they're within a investigative services directorate potentially. These include different ranks, skills, and sometimes access rights, and they often work to collaborate to deliver the service. They're the ones who are dealing with the burglary. They're the ones dealing with the actual crime. So they will often use teams to do that. But lots of people in that team will often share skills, access, or interests in areas of business with different colleagues in different functions. So the best example would be a public order policing. Many officers undergo the additional training and have the responsibilities associated with policing large events such as football matches or public order situations. And when a police support unit is called together, they're often made up of people in a range of different day jobs, but they all need to be kept up to date on training, plans, policy, operational updates, etc. So this would be an example of where a community of people with those powers might exist, and that's where perhaps the Yammer side would come into. So, you know, the other ones could be staff associations. It could be a lot less formal things like football clubs, selling and buying things. We'll have a look at those in a few minutes. And they could also be automatically administered based on access, based on what says in the HR. We've got a lot of things to cover today, and today is really a top level overview, and we are going to do a workshop in a few weeks' time, and the link will be popped up for that to explain, so we can get into the detail, get into 90 minutes. And we're going to bring in some volunteers from forces, or volunteered people from forces, who will explain their journey on Yammer. We've got a couple of forces who've actually got to over 80% of their colleagues using Yammer on a weekly basis, and another force who's relaunching Yammer and starting that to do. So we'll be joined by that. Today I've got a couple of colleagues from Microsoft who will join us in a second. And let's get on to how things have changed, first of all. So there is a misconception out there that it's a difference between Teams and Yammer. Well, I think one of the things we really need to perhaps get across is that we're not talking about a difference here. They are part of the 365 suite, and we shouldn't be thinking of them as one versus the other. They're actually a combined experience, and that's the way we've got to need to think of this. And we don't want you to have to think that you've got to run away to a different platform to access content on Yammer. So let's have a look at how things could actually do. I'll just move past that one. Firstly, and Chris will cover this in a second, you'll see that Yammer is part of the Teams environment through Viva Engage, and that's some of the things that's changed in the last few months, and will Microsoft explain that. And of course, users will remain in control of notifications, and we'll cover a little bit more of that. But what I wanted to do was just explain how things are a little bit more connected. So many forces are now rolling out SharePoint as their intranet sites and using SharePoint News or putting chief officer briefings up. That will exist in this 365 environment. It could also be hosting your all hands meetings on Yammer now, and how that integrates into Stream. But that doesn't mean that's the place where people will actually find the content. we often think about how something sitting here might be shared into a force-wide, organisational-wide group, or into a community group. Somebody might go, this is of interest to everybody who's looking at being an investigator. They'll post it into there, and then a CID sergeant might post it into a Teams conversation, all the time leading back to that one piece of version of the truth, effectively, to try and manage that. So if we put a little bit of context around it, this is how we've perhaps try and explain how the tools will work together and how Yammer can play an important part of this. And we always add a little bit of a filter to this around sensitivity and around highly sensitive information and where it needs to be managed a little bit more manageable. So let's get into a little bit more about this today. And I'm going to invite Rich, first of all. Rich, do you want to come in from a Microsoft point of view and perhaps explain where we sit in this space?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And thanks for having us on. And so, Dave, I think the key thing here is that, we're not asking individuals to adopt Yammer and use team structure in that. I think that's really absolutely key, is that, as you've explained before, is that Teams is created as that collaborative approach where you're working as a project team, those types of things. So within Microsoft, we absolutely use the same principles across that. So as our customer success managers, myself, Chris and Jolie work together, we're sharing documents, we're sharing that those timeframes, those projects. That's absolutely a team for us from there. Just as we are with all up police accounts, or whether you've got a product team that's working on a particular project, Teams is absolutely the right place to be. Where we then look at Yammer is absolutely around that, I'm not in a team with Satya and Judson and Claire Barkley. That's where I start communicating and understanding what the vision of the organization is, what the culture is, through things like our leadership connections. Other great examples is things like our employee resource groups, or when I first came into Microsoft, is our onboarding community. So I can reach out to people in that similar situation. So again, as we always say, is Yammer is about, I want to collaborate with people that I don't know. And Teams is about, I'm collaborating with people that I do know, and I'm working in that sort of team structure from there. I think that one of the key things in that is, what is the difference between Viva Engage and Yammer? I think the important thing is, the way I look at it is, they are still the same product. Yammer is almost the standalone product that you can access through your 365 portal, and that's basically the engine that sources through Viva Engage. And again, we're highly focused on bringing that into the flow of your work, having Teams as that central platform. And I think you'll probably will demonstrate in a second now with Chris, is that this is a great way to send out company announcements and messages without you having to go to different places. Chris, could you demonstrate that for us, mate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will just get my screen shared for you and take you through one of those examples, as you've just mentioned, of sort of sending out those announcements. So hopefully now we can see my screen, and what we can see is we've got a Yammer community here, and actually, this is one of the ones that Rich just mentioned around sort of leadership connections. So this is in our demo environment, but a really good media here to be able to share the leadership connections with the entire of the organization. Now, as we've been saying, actually placing that content, we place that content on Yammer, but using Viva Engage, we can then surface that through Teams. So I'll do a quick example of that. We've got our leadership connections. So this is our Yammer community, and everybody in our force is part of this this community. So we can come onto here, we can do a new discussion, and we can share thoughts or ideas or updates. But one of the key buttons we've got down here is this announcement. So I will just put some content in here that I will just copy and paste just for ease. So we've got an example here of just doing something like, our chief officer's orders from the previous week. And we've got our content, we've put our content on stream previously. It's just an example video that we've got. But we can see on here, we've got just straight away, the video appears then within Yammer. I can get rid of the actual link. And then I can use this button down here to make this an announcement. So you can see on here, once I've done that, we have just notification. We've only got 10 people within our demo organization. but 10 people will be notified via Yammer. We've also got the option then to notify people by email if we want as well. So what I can do is I can post that, and when I post that message, when I post that message, what will happen is anybody who is within that community, so remember this is everybody in the organization, will get that notification through Viva Engage. So if I come into, this is a separate user, just switch users and browsers, I then have, because I've got Viva Engage installed into Teams, in my Teams activity feed, I've then got that Grady's posted this announcement here. I can then interact with it, I can like it, I can comment on it, etc. And I can watch that video directly within my Teams client as well, he says, and then something goes wrong. So that mobile experience as well, so I can switch across to my mobile. This is signed in as another user as well. And you can see I've got Alan signed in here. Again, I'm within the Teams app, and I've got that Grady's posted that announcement at the top. So this takes me then through to Viva Engage. Again, I get the video, I still get the same options to interact with it. Hopefully I'll be able to play that video. So a really, really good way of reaching through to my organization. See, we've got some issues just on stream at the moment, but reaching through to my organization and being able to get those announcements out to the whole organization. So just while I'm here on that mobile view as well, we can go across here and we can see that, you know, I've got my feed. So I can see on here anything that's been posted recently so this uses AI and looks at what the system thinks I would be interested in, looks at my communities as well. And then I can come across to a communities button as well, which lists out all the communities that I'm a member of and gives me obviously the option to go into each of those communities. So I'm just going to hand back to Rich to just show you what that experience looks like a little bit more on the desktop as well, and also just to take you through difference between communities and stories.
Thanks ever so much, Chris. Yeah, and just as Chris was saying, this is all within the flow of Microsoft Teams, right? So over the last years, you've been doing an amazing job of creating Teams and bringing the workflow into Teams from there. Now, there's three parts of this. The first one is your home feed. So this one's going to surface all of your messages, your people that you're connected to within your the Viva Engage community, and also the communities that you're a member of. So I can see here just through that home feed that Grady's posted an announcement from there. I can also see there's some goalkeeper gloves for sale and buy for sale. I can see that there's achieved orders from there. So when we come to the difference between communities and storylines, think as communities, as we explained before, around that I want to collaborate with people that I don't know. I want to hear about the organization. I want to learn from others. I want to even, send out a message of how do I go about getting something done? Comes as no surprise if I get asked a question that I'm not sure about from one of my sort of people that the customers and the people that I work with. I'm absolutely going to that relevant community and asking the question. So that's the importance of those communities from there. It's about sharing our experience under that thematic area. So if it's a police treatment area, I may want to share about my previous experience, or I may be going up there, or we may be driving and trying to say to people, look, be part of the police treatment centre, or it could be our local federation reps, etc. from there, or Unison. Storylines is more around about my brand. So very much like you would see on normal social media platforms, I can add stories, I can add sort of what I've been up to. So again, think of it as a safer neighborhood team officer. I'm having a pitch taken with locals in the community. I've had a great day, or I'm a wildlife officer and I've been out and I've done something really engaging. That's me building up my profile. The other great thing is that if I'm a chief officer and I'm really wanting to show the sort of who I'm about, what my passions are, what my culture is that I'm trying to drive into that, I can absolutely follow them. And that's one of the things that we do really well within Microsoft is I can absolutely go and follow our senior leaders and see what they're up to on a daily basis from there. And again, add stories such as, you know, we've had the new car, great start to my shift in our new police vehicle, and people can comment it just like any other aspect of it. The other aspect I think is just really key before I go over around the management side of things is what we can do with things around our particular content is that we can add topics. So this becomes really really key when we say things like chief orders, and I want to look for that within a particular area. So I can search all Viva Engage and I can search for items that have been added with the word or actually with the topic of that, and I can actually follow that particular topic and see that this has been tagged. So you can start tagging those items of well-being from there. But I'm just going to bring Dave in now around the management side of things, because I think that's really important and something, again, just like Microsoft Teams, we need to just cover that off. So over to yourself, Dave.
Yeah, just a brief one really, Richard, on this is that there's a number of ways that we could be perhaps sharing and content and describing the teams, and we did a little bit of an exercise, and we will pick this up at when we do the workshop in a couple of weeks' time on the sort of groups we can do. But we have got a template governance. We worked with Cumbria, who were one of the early forces to adopt 365, and we have actually built a draft governance that's in the enabling centre. You can use that as a template, and we're really keen that forces share back their governance approaches. One thing that's really important is it doesn't all fall to the comms team to manage these. Each community has its own community managers and set of rules, and the community almost self-polices this and works in that space. So it's really important that those people who want a community are prepared to help manage that community and establish that and work with the community and make it work. It does take a little bit of effort to make communities thrive, so it's important we don't have too many. Also, there will be an administration process to make sure that we're not handing up with duplicate communities or communities that are just the same as a team. Those are the things that we really will need to avoid as we progress through this and move us forward. Rich, before we go on, there's just a question around fatigue. People say that they get fatigue in terms of not being known to answer this. How does using Engage and Yammer work to perhaps filter out some of the noise that you don't want to respond, so you can focus on what's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's again is one of the key things around this is that, you know, you could have 20 communities, 25 communities within a place. You're not going to get bombarded with all that information. As Chris alluded to earlier on, is that you can have a company-wide one, which will self-join everyone, but you're in control of where do I want to join those particular communities. And when you do join those communities, you are going to get you know, you're going to get that information back from there. So you are in control to a certain extent from that.
And I'll just go into another question. It's something we did plan to discuss. There's some concerns by the FISO and DPO concerns about where the data is used in Yammer and where it's stored. And we've been working with you some time, and there is now a solution in place, isn't there, to help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as from now, forces, I think a lot of forces are already, their data is in the EU, but there may be occasions where forces initial Yammer data may be in the US. Now we are able to reprovision where data is stored. Now it's really key to note here that if you have data that's stored in the US, we cannot transfer that data over, but you can start afresh having all the data stored within the EU.
That's brilliant. And you know, that has always been a barrier to, because whilst we don't particularly want to use Yammer for operational matters, and as in discussing how to respond to a specific incident, there's always that risk of data leaking across through accidental usage. At least this way it's in the EU and fits within the environment that we're already using within 365. Another question here is around, do you think there were a risk of isolating members who aren't very tech literate or confident? Now, I know one of the things we can do is actually embed a Yammer feed into a SharePoint site, can't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can really make that become part and parcel of your intranet if you're adopting it that way. But again, you know, with the applications and bringing it into Microsoft Teams, we want to make it as easy as possible for individuals to be able to navigate through that.
That's brilliant. And can you bring in people from outside your organisation into your Yammer community, so different colleagues from different forces can share good practice and networking? And it's something we've been speaking about for some time, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of like the knowledge hub type of thing, Dave. Yeah, so again, on the same principles as Microsoft Teams, because when we're talking about Yammer and Viva Engage, it's a 365 group, right? So it comes with its own SharePoint environment. You are enabled to allow guests into your environment from there through the appropriate mechanisms.
And this is where we point forces towards moving forward onto their designs and their blueprints and getting to as up to date as possible, because some of this functionality is dependent on being on the highest levels of blueprints. And we have a webinar coming up very soon on designs and blueprints for you, so do head over to the PDS website to get the details of that. And there is a really helpful comment in here. Is this basically an internal version of Facebook? And in many ways, yeah. What do you think, Rich?
Yeah, I like it.
The reality is, of course, that as we've become more familiar with digital engagement tools or social media platforms, we want that sort of relevancy, that sort of experience of in our internal space. We don't want it just to be pushed down. We want to be able to move this across and to exchange ideas with people, and you can have very different groups in terms of what you could be doing it. And I was looking at a couple of forces recently who created groups based on access, so they got groups on everybody who could use a certain piece of technology, so that if there was something, a new update or learning around that technology, that could automatically be enrolled. But similarly, we've got groups around hobbies and interests, and we've been experimenting it within PDS, and one of our most popular groups, because we will work remotely and we want to make sure that we're not feeling isolated. Books and films recommendations has become a really lively community where, because we can't have that water cooler moment, that moment in the canteen or the coffee machine, the virtual books community is really helping to build that community as well. But you could be thinking about it for new starters, or you could be bringing everybody as a Pulsar trained officer. Quickly back to questions, Richard. Can the data be based in the UK?
Okay, so this is where it just gets slightly complicated, right? Is with regards to the text that you put into the Yammer post, that is EU. However, you've got a SharePoint group that's created. You've got a 365 group that's created, right? So your SharePoint still remains on the same. Your stream video still remains in the same as the UK there. So that's just important to note from that aspect of it. And I think that's something that we can go into a lot of details in on the workshops from there, David. But yeah, just think of it as a rule of thumb. If it's the text that's in the posts and the polls and the the recognition, then that it will be the EU. If you've moved that to the EU, your SharePoint libraries, your document repositories, that all sits within your SharePoint environments, exactly the same as Teams.
Brilliant. Now we are running short of time, so obviously we've covered quite a lot in Viva and Viva Engage and Outlook. Is there anything else you and Chris particularly want to highlight before we move on to the last couple of questions?
But I think the main thing here is that it gives you a great option if you're creating too many teams. And I think, from conversations that we're having is that, sometimes we can overprescribe teams where a community would be better served from there. I would also say reach out via your PDS engagement officer and to ourselves if you want to look at, where does your data reside with regards to Yammer, and we can make those provisions in place and start that process going.
Fantastic. I'll just come to one more question, if I could. Chiefs blogs and Chiefs announcements are perhaps a good example of how we could cover using Yammer to get everything across in the force, and what challenges might that cause if the data isn't UK based?
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely key around the sensitivity chart that you sort of alluded to at the beginning, is make sure that you're happy as an organization, what is operationally critical or what is more general knowledge that your chief would be happy to post on other social forums from there, from that aspect of it.
And I think a really helpful test is, would it be subject to an FOI? Would it be disclosed if somebody asked for that report? And the reality is, so much of our stuff that we talk about in terms of policy and how we do our work is disclosable publicly, and we need to build that trust and transparency with the public. So really, Teams is for that operational, and the 365 environment, SharePoint for that operational work. Yammer is for talking about how we do policing and those other issues. So we are getting to the end, coming to the bottom of the hour. I want to thank Richard and Chris for their input today, and they've committed to join us on the workshop. We will post the link again, and we'll put it into the Force collaboration channel as well for people to sign up. We're just working on dates at the moment of when we're going to host this that suits as many people as possible to get them involved, and we do want to cover that. I've just sort of spotted a question come in about are we able to use Yammer with our e-discovery and advanced e-discovery tools? Richard, are you able to answer that one, price of assurance?
I think Chris has just posted in there, as long as Yammer is in native mode, then it's covered by e-discovery. The other functionality that you do get within like the sort of the admin settings of Yammer is that you can have keywords. So you can input keywords that would flag to the administrator upon there. But I think the key thing here is make sure it's in the native mode of that, and then that's going to be all e-discovery and compliant.
And it's certainly better that we're having our internal conversations on channels that policing runs and manages, rather than falling into the WhatsApp solutions that we've been ending up in over recently. So remember, you can get in touch with your business engagement manager at any point. You can scan the QR code, head over to the PDS website, fill in the details, really just fit in there. We've got a really good process that we will be sharing in the future about how we manage that inbound contact. Here's the webinars and events coming up in the next couple of weeks. So we've got role-based access coming up next week with Tom Connor. This is a really important one. And this, again, having role-based access will help with this sort of thing in terms of team structures, Yammer structures, SharePoint news delivery. All those things are really important. So we can do that. And then designs and blueprints. Just a reminder of the save the date for the Police Digital Summit that's coming up very soon as well. But thank you, Richard and Chris, for joining us today. Thanks to the team in the background who've been clicking the buttons, answering your questions. If we haven't got to all your questions, we will roll them over to the workshop where we're going to bring in those forces who've got that experience, and they can share how they've been able to do things like data retention, etc. moving forward. So thank you so much for joining us today. Hope to see you on our next webinar next week.